Hello everybody, John here, and today onto the garage we've got a real good fun one. We're gonna talk about garage stuff in British English and American English. Hello everybody, John here, and as you can see the background has changed somewhat. That's because I'm working away from home in Ruby, my motorhome. But that doesn't stop us making a video like this, which is why I'm doing it. So, this video discussing the differences between British English and American English in the context of cars, garages, tools, all the interesting things that if you're following this channel, then frankly, you're on the wrong channel unless you're interested in those things. You're not going to find this to be a xenophobic video, although I know they are very popular on YouTube. I'm not going to be bashing the States. In fact, I would go as far as to say about half of the phrases I'm going to mention, if I had to pick one, I'd pick the American one. There's some American ones where I just go, and to be fair, I think some Americans do too. So this is genuinely an interesting discussion, sharing the interesting, sometimes amusing differences between two the same languages. So let's crack straight on. Okay, this first one we're going to look at is not going to confuse anybody. In the UK, what you are looking at is universally a number plate. And in America, that would be a license plate. It's not too confusing between the two. There's a major difference in how these things are used. In the UK, every car has one, front and rear, and the car is kind of born or registered and given that number, and unless you pay to have something a little different put on there, that stays with the car for its life, regardless of the owner. It's the number of the car. It's a number plate. In the States, we have license plates. Some states you don't need them at all. Some you only need them on the rear. All sorts of things go on. And it's different in different territories. But in some areas, it's a license. You kind of purchase the plate or update the plate. It's a way of showing that you've paid to use the roads, I guess. So, yeah, it's a license plate. I would rather have a license plate, not because of the word, but because they are smaller. Our plates are huge, and we may get away with only having one on the rear, which I'd love, because it's got to be said, Jag XK8s are ruined by our enormous number plates, and really would love to ditch the number plate. The next one, the area I'm pointing out on my car Purdy, is absolutely called in the UK the wing. This is the wing of the car. Cars have wings. They tend to have 4 wings. In the States, that would be known as the fender. And a car will have 4 fenders. And it's where we get an expression which we use in the UK, fender bender, also used in the States, for, you have a knock in a car park, somebody's bent your fender, and that means you've got a damaged wing in America. But in the UK, fender, other than a guitar brand, is also another expression for a bumper. A bumper or car irons, very old expression, the things you use to touch park with, let's say. So a fender bender still works because we think of it as you've crumpled your bumper. But yeah, totally different expressions. Both have a very logical background, as is always the way in these things. You tend to find that British words have either a source which is slightly foreign, because we have a lot of French words, Latin words, or a very historical source, because ancient country, whereas America is quite a young country, a modern country. Its language tends to come from, it's obvious that's what it is. We don't have to comply with French spelling or weird words. It's a fender. It fends stuff off, dirt and rain and stones from being spat up at the windscreen and the driver. In the UK, it refers back to older cars, moving my hands in the wrong direction, which have flowing wheel arches, and sometimes there were planks, literally wooden arches curved over the front wheels when we had wooden wheels. And then the gap between these wheel arches and the tapered long bonnet would be filled with a triangle, and that would start to build these things that looked like wings on the front of a car. So they were the wings, but what were they there for? To fend off the dirt and the grime. So that's the difference in language there. But be aware, Americans, sometimes if you say, I've got a new fender, we're going to think you've bought a bumper, because that doesn't work. If we say wings, it doesn't mean fins on the back of a car. It doesn't usually mean a dirty grey aerofoil on the back of the car. Wings means wheel arches, which is the obvious expression we should both be using if we're absolutely honest. Even the least observant among you will note new background, better quality video and better quality audio, because I'm back in my office. Here in the pictures of Purdy, we are looking at, in the UK, the indicators. They are universally called the indicators, and the little lozenge shaped lights further down the side are the repeaters. They repeat what the indicators are doing, and they're a legal requirement in the UK and many other countries that allow people parked alongside a pedestrian or a cyclist to know that the car is going to turn maybe towards them and cut across them. In the States, this would typically be a turn signal. Again, neither is really going to confuse folk. Indicators is a pretty reasonable description and comes very much from, originally we used to indicate with our hands and make arm signals, and then we went to what was called semaphores, little flags that used to pop out the side of the car indicating which way we're going to go. There's very plain logic to it, as is for turn signals or traffic signals, as the term is typically in the States. So no real difference there in terms of understandability, but pretty universally we do use a different word for those. Interestingly, in the States, it's quite common to be able to use maybe a brake light as a turn signal, or to have a brake light turn off as a turn signal. In the UK, and again a lot of Europe, we have to have an independent light that has got no connection with any of the other lights, but is doing this signalling. Laws are changing though, and you do start to see, with the advent of LED, little variations on a theme creeping in, which seem to be starting to break that barrier. People seem able to do a little bit more interesting things, as long as they're very obvious when they're turning. The next one is a brake part, and we're looking here at what we in the UK would absolutely call a brake disc. And brake discs come in all sorts of formats, but they're always brake discs. In the States, these would almost universally be called brake rotors. There's a good deal of sense to both of them, so neither of them again is a particular language barrier, but can be a little surprising if you've not heard the expression. And people from the States should be slightly wary if they're inquiring with a British parts store, that if it's an older parts store dealing in older vehicles, it's quite possible if you say, can I have a rotor for a 1970s Jaguar XJ6, they will come out with a very small box because they're going to bring you a rotor arm. The term rotor is really unusual to use for a disc, a brake disc. So if you ask for some brake pads and can I have the rotors as well, you'll probably get what you're asking for, because in context it's fine, but rotor does mean typically rotor arm, and a rotor arm, the little thing that spins around inside your distributor. Okay, so all those were a bit tame, if I'm honest. So now we come to the first one where I've got any real opinion on, and here British English wins hands down, but I do invite my American friends to try to justify the American expression. And that word, the British word for the part that you're seeing on screen now, is absolutely, this is the sill of the car. The sill of the car is the panel that runs along the bottom below the door. If you look up in a dictionary the definition of the word sill, the sill is the bottom plate of a door or window. It joins together and keeps strong the hinge panel and the slam panel. And if you add a Y in it, and remember lots of old English words have foreign linkages, in this case Norse, so the Vikings, and if you put a Y in it instead of an I, sill, it means strong foundation. It's a sill. In America, it's called a rocker panel. Now, in absolute fairness, I do have 3 possible explanations for rocker panel. First 2, really not very convincing at all. Third one, possible but unlikely in my opinion. So, number 1, in the 50s, cars tended to have chrome sills. In the States, it was part of the trend, led by rockers. Hot rods, rockers, rock and roll, rocker panels. Now, the second one is that off-roaders, 4x4s, if you beach your car, then it will rock, if you imagine a boulder underneath it, on the rocker panel, and therefore you get rocker bars and reinforced rocker panels to stop the cars from snapping in half. Currently, yes, and slang, yes, I get it, but obviously off-roading to that extent is too new compared to the use of the term rocker panel instead of a sill. And the third, which sounds more like the sort of thing you'd deploy as an explanation of a British word, is horses and carriages used to have an ugly area where the floor is quite deep. You'd step over what I would call the sill to get into the carriage, and that's a strengthening piece. And so therefore it would often be decorated to disguise the depth of that sill with the motif of a rocking horse or a rocking chair, and it became the rocker panel. I'm really not very convinced by that. Plus, again, I would say that in the States you were very much more simple and straightforward in your naming. And if you're going to have horses and carriages with ornate gold and gilded stuff on, come see us. we've got that. You guys, it was more of a tool in the States when horses and carriages were the normal de rigueur transport. So I'm really unconvinced by those, and I'd be really interested to know what my friends in the States think, or if there is a far more straightforward explanation for rocker panel. And do you ever use the expression sill? It's the only one we use. No word of a lie. Let's move straight on to another one, but this time my preference, and it's very strong, is the other way round. So the element on my XK8 that you're looking at now in the UK is known as a scuttle panel. And I'm going to reveal straight away that in the States it has various names, but the most common seems to be the vent panel. scuttle panel, I feel, is a real problematical description. So if you know where it is, you know where it is. You know, it's like being told something's blue. That's what it is. And I know it as a scuttle panel and always have. However, once you start to dig around in the etymology of it and where does this come from and why is it a good idea, it's less justifiable. Some people would say that it's related to the fact that the shape on older cars tends to be that of a coal scuttle. Some of them were copper, like coal scuttles. And it's kind of the bridging piece between the base of the windscreen and the engine cover, and as such seem to be a transitional piece. And when we had steam-powered vehicles, you'd often be shoveling coal into the area below the scuttle panel. So there's that sort of coal scuttle connection, which I'm not entirely happy with. There's also scuttle, as in we would scuttle a ship. Scuttling a ship is pulling the plug out, basically, and allowing it to sink. And there are scuttles in ships, and they're kind of areas that are intended to let water either in or out, if that was ever necessary. And of course, that panel at the top positively allows water to go through. There's no attempt to stop water going into the air intakes. It's then directed out through the bottom and drains away. So there's a sort of connection there, which I think is slightly more logical. But I've got to say, vent panel is so much easier, and I think classically an American naming convention. What is it? It's a panel with vents in, typically. Let's call it a vent panel. British, scuttle panel. Well, I've made a decision whilst on the fly here. I never script anything, I'm terrible. That the initial list I made in my little brown book, which I thought, oh, that'll be useful for a 10-20 minute video, which is page and a half long, will have to be split into 2 or 3 videos. What am I like? I start talking and time disappears. So we'll call this one going to be about sort of car parts externally, naming conventions. But we've also got mechanical parts, suspension and engine, tools. We've got types of car and some other odds and sods that I want to share as well. So I'm just going to round off with another couple. Possibly the most well-known difference between American and British car naming conventions. The one I get pulled up about all the time, usually by Brits, for using American terms because my brain's fried from trying to keep everybody content. But it is quite interesting to look at the difference and the maybe why. And that is, here on my British XK8, we are looking at the bonnet. Now, just to be clear to our American friends, this is not a case of me using flowery language or something that classic car enthusiasts would use as a term. It's a bonnet. End of. There is no alternate for this panel. And of course, in the States, we use the term hood. And there's pretty much no grey area there either. You just call it the hood. And a few of you, again, classic car enthusiasts, maybe into your British cars, might call it bonnet because, you know, it's novel. But bonnet and hood are 2 distinct names for the same thing. And both of them have decent grounds for being. Bonnet and hood are both forms of head covering. What is at the top of an engine? A cylinder head. It's to cover the head. It's to cover the engine bay. Bonnet, something that keeps you dry. Hood, something that keeps you dry. It's the same thing, and why they've deviated, I really couldn't tell you, but that is the difference. When I think back to my youth, it all worked fine until you were presented with a Volkswagen Beetle or a Hillman Imp and you went to open up the cover over the engine, and is that a bonnet? It doesn't feel like a bonnet anymore. Is it a hood? Doesn't feel like a hood anymore. So, as a naming convention, we understand it entirely. However, the Americanism hood gives a few issues to Brits in terms of naming convention, because what is the top of my car? It's a convertible and it has a hood. So that's what a hood is. And again, outerwear keeps you dry, covers my head. There is no problem with the term hood unless you've already used it up on your bonnet. So that's the only reason that I personally prefer bonnet, because it leaves the word hood for the hood. And we would also say hood mechanism, hood cover, all those sorts of good things in relation to a convertible. And we wouldn't mean the engine cover. For hardtop vehicles, then we would universally use the expression roof, which you guys would use for the roof. Just that small crossover area in the middle where a Brit might talk about he's got a leaky hood, and you think, what, it's not sitting properly and letting water into the engine bay. It's minor, but it's there. And finally, as we started talking about bonnets and hoods, there can't be too many amongst you who haven't guessed that the other phrase we were going to just round this one off with is, in the UK, our cars have a boot. And again, that's not me using extra flowery language. That is exactly what it's called. It'll be in the brochure. We all talk about a car's boot and boot space and boot capacity. We never use the expression trunk, although we all know exactly what it means. And there is a phrase actually where I tend to mix my descriptions quite a lot, because I'm so used to chatting online with my American buddies, and trunk just comes up all the time. The battery's in the trunk, the fuse box is in the trunk, all those sorts of things. And I find myself using the expression trunk in my videos, and then I've got all the Brits on my back going, have you got American, John? What's happening? So we use those terms exclusively, it seems, in our two countries, but both parties smile and completely understand what is going on in the other country. Just on the etymology of those, very, very similar. What I don't know is why they chose to diversify at all. So the original is British just by virtue of the fact that older country. So that is boot, and it comes from, before cars, we had carriages. So horse-drawn carriages would have a compartment on the back that was to keep your boots in. Simple as that. And this sort of integrated lidded area on the back was to enable you to maybe hop onto it like a tailgate and change your boots and keep your boots in the boot so that they didn't get muddy inside the carriage. That's where it comes from. Trunk is a very small leap, but does talk a little bit more to the styles of carriages in our two relative countries around and about the point where motor cars were becoming popular. And typically in the States there wouldn't be quite such ornate carriages. There'd be more everyday horse-drawn vehicles around, but you have the stagecoach, which we'll see in movies and obviously is perfectly historically accurate. But it would be quite common to have a chest or trunk on the back or some other kind of box, and that is where you keep things locked up, safe and secure. And maybe there were boots in there. Probably they were. But it was very much a trunk. So trunk makes absolute sense as well. Well, that's more than enough for this episode. As I said, lots more to come, and I haven't even gone near the one that really winds me up the most yet. So if you've got ideas and you think there's a less obvious expression that maybe we should discuss as part of these little videos, then please send it in. I have a big list, so chances are I've got most of the ones that you guys are thinking of. But please don't hold back if you think there's something I missed, and particularly in maybe tooling, hand tools, etc. That's an area that I'd like to explore a little bit more. I'm aware of some of the obvious differences, but maybe not all of them. Anyway, hopefully we shall see you all soon again on To The Garage. If you're enjoying our channel, then don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell icon so you get notifications of new videos. And please give us a thumbs up or thumbs down, and you can share the videos. And below the video is always the area where you can comment and get involved with the chat.